Primary voting in the US is an important process in which both the Democrat and Republican parties have their leaders elected to represent them by registered voters, seen in 2016 with the accession of Hillary Clinton as Democrat leader, as well as Donald Trump as Republican leader. However, while primaries are used in the US and have been used for a prolonged time, there is argument that it has become a flawed system. But what are primaries, and how do they change the outcome of an election? Primaries are a type of pre-election held by political parties as a means to select candidates that will represent them in the election, and were proliferated in the US after the 1968 McGovern-Fraser Commission, in most cases used to replace caucuses, seen as a more democratic selection process. There are three types of primaries used in the US, and these are the following. Open. Any registered voter can choose to vote in either party's primary. However, they are not allowed to vote in both. Closed. Only registered Republicans can vote in a Republican primary, and the same covers Democrat voters and their primaries. And then there are mixed systems, and this is the application of a closed primary system in which those registered as independents can vote either Democrat or Republican. The problem with this variety is that they affect which candidates become more likely to win. This is seen in the form of more ideological candidates performing better in a closed system, as only the party faithful can vote, whereas more centrist candidates, such as John McCain, tend to do better in open and even mixed systems due to the impact of the independents or the change in political alliance. This therefore reveals that the type of primary chosen by a state can give an unfair bias to certain candidates, resulting in a flawed process. The leadership elections in the UK, for example, are conducted under the AV system for both Labour and Liberal Democrats, and are usually processed in a much shorter time period than primaries, with no potential bias to any one candidate. Another potentially flawed aspect to the primary system is the manner in which delegates are proportioned. This refers to the two ways in which primaries are adopted by the two big parties, with the Republican primaries being winner takes all. This means that regardless of what extent a candidate won, they would receive all the delegates from that state, evidenced by the California Republican primary of 2000, in which George Bush amassed 60% of the vote and gained all 162 delegates, regardless of John McCain's 34% of the vote. This process can be unfair, as the amount of delegates within each state varies. For example, there were 101 delegates in the New York primary, but only 36 delegates for Utah. This then varies the amount of success from state to state, and can result in candidates pandering to bigger delegated states over less important states. However, the Democratic primaries are processed in proportional means. This means that each candidate gets delegates in proportion to the number of votes attained. For example, in the California Democratic primary in 2000, Al Gore attained 81% of the votes, resulting in 304 delegates, while Bill Bradley amassed 18% of the vote, equaling 63 delegates. Therefore, the system seems to be only fair for the Democrat candidates, resulting in a flawed process for half the primaries, which is seemingly undemocratic. Thirdly, the duration or length of these primaries is potentially flawed also. Previously, prior to 1992, New Hampshire was a big state in determining who the frontrunner will be, as before 1992 every president had won this primary. This has caused a ripple effect in which other state parties stampede to earlier dates in the nominating calendar. This was evident in the Florida Democrats, who moved their primary to the 29th of January in 2008, even though the Democratic Party national community ruled that only Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina could hold primaries prior to February 5th, and voted in August 2007 to strip the Florida Democrat Party of all of its 210 delegates, unless they moved it back to its original date on February 5th. So the result of this is that Karen Furman, who was the chair of the Florida Democrats, did not change the date back, and the same event started to occur in Michigan also, where 156 delegates were stripped. The problem with this is that it revokes a positive aspect of long campaign rounds, which is to weed out weaker candidates, as, according to Professor Linda Fowler of Dartmouth College, the edge now will go to candidates able to successfully court donors or activists in the invisible primary.
Study estimated that voters in Iowa have 5 times the influence of voters who live in states with later primaries, which doesn't exactly square with the idea of one person, one vote. A national primary day isn't exactly a new idea. It's been proposed in Congress more than 100 times since 1911, but none of those bills have gone anywhere. And one reason is that the national political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, they don't really like the idea. They worry that a 50-state campaign would basically just become a giant TV ad war, where the candidate with the most money always has the advantage. The national parties have helped protect Iowa and New Hampshire, in part because these are small states where candidates have to engage in the tradition of retail politics, shaking hands, kissing babies, and eating fried food with the locals. Iowa and New Hampshire also fight to protect their own calendar positions, which originally came about more or less by historical accident.
From time to time when they've been challenged, they've let it be known to the presidential candidates, you'd better not go mount a campaign in one of those states trying to jump before us.
Back in 1996, Louisiana tried to jump the line and hold its caucus first, but Iowa politicians told the candidates if they campaigned in Louisiana, they would be sorry. The candidates obliged, and the pundits and press deemed the Louisiana contest meaningless. Iowa and New Hampshire fight tooth and nail to keep their first and second status, and the national parties, they have no interest in challenging them. If other states try to leapfrog Iowa or New Hampshire, both states have laws requiring them to schedule their contests even earlier. So instead, the other states schedule their primaries as close to Iowa and New Hampshire as they can, a process called front-loading, which is how we get this schedule where contests after Super Tuesday don't really matter that much, and where most people, rationally, choose to stay home when their state's primary rolls around.
However, there are reasons as to why this type of voting is a strength for the US. This is because, after reforming the system, the level of participation has risen significantly. In 1968, the last year of the unreformed system, only 11.7 million Americans took part in the nominating process. That equates to about 11% of the voting age population. But by 1988, the figure had risen to 35 million people, and by 2008, just under 58 million people, which is 30% of the voting age, showing a continued rise in participation, thereby making it a more democratic process. This is in comparison to caucuses, which is an unelected process in which a committee chooses the most favourable candidate. Lastly, the long process in which the candidates participate in is important for weeding out the weak candidates, as mentioned before. This is important as the demanding job of presidency will be grueling, and those unable to commit to this campaign should not be fit for presidency. This was seen in 1992, in which Senator Paul Tsongas, who had been battling cancer prior to his run to presidency, was seen to have a notably lighter schedule compared to his rivals, and, while many people admired him, they did not think that he would have the physical resilience to be president. To conclude, primary voting in the US is a big problem, and is potentially a flawed system, based on the types of voting affecting the result, and when the primaries are, as well as the proportion of delegates that are attained. However, it cannot be dismissed that it is very good at getting the best possible candidates for each party. Or maybe not.